Hello and welcome to Live in the Hearse. I'm your host Carrie Jackson and this is my co-host Alfred, and we changed up the studio a little bit. We hope you like it. Today's interview is with fireman, paramedic, and professional car collector, Mr. Lou Farah. He is going to showcase for us his ambulances that were at the show. I think you'll really enjoy it. Let's go. I know something about you, Lou. It's your birthday. It's your birthday.
That it is.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Well, at Live in the Hearse, we want to know, and it should be, for this show, it should be live in the ambulance, but, you know, hey, it's Live in the Hearse. We want to know, what was the first car that really got you started? You said, I want that car, and I want to be in that profession.
Well, when I was 5 years old, I lived in Toluca Lake on a major street, Moore Park Street. There was a pretty serious car accident in front of my house. And of course, as I looked at all of this in awe, eventually the ambulance did arrive, and that ambulance, the exact ambulance that arrived, was this.
Wow.
1957 Chevy Suburban, built by the Yankee Corporation of Los Angeles. I remember seeing this ambulance for about 2 or 3 years in my neighborhood. This was the local ambulance. And then I never saw it again until about 25 years later, when I became a paramedic, and a friend of mine with the city of Los Angeles said, I know you've always had this fascination with this ambulance. He remembers a little kid. He was an ambulance collector as well. He said, why don't you come on by the house on Saturday? And he had this ambulance. It needed to be completely restored, but it was the ambulance I remembered as a 5-year-old, and just a memory of that ambulance when I got into my teenage years and my early 20s, it's kind of my inspiration to become a paramedic. This year I celebrate my 47th year as a paramedic, and not only did it inspire me for my career, but to buy my Cadillac and Buick and Oldsmobile ambulance collections, of which I own now, which eventually became Vintage Emergency Vehicles, the company that I own, which is the largest provider of vintage ambulances to the Hollywood film industry today.
That's fantastic, Lou.
So the day that as a 5-year-old and recognized this ambulance, another, well, if I was 5 years old, another 16 years later, I became a paramedic. That led from me going from being in love with ambulances to a paramedic and back to loving ambulances, buying them and restoring them. And I have 7 of the ambulances here today at the show. So it's an addiction. That's
way cool. And in just a moment. Okay, Lou, tell me about this beautiful car.
All right, so this is a nice one because you can trace its history back to the day it was new. It was purchased brand new in 1947. By Ayers Ambulance Service in Bakersfield, California. Served at Ayers until about 1951, when the company was bought by Snyder Ambulance in Van Nuys, California. In 1955, Snyder Ambulance sold to another company and brought this car back to Van Nuys to their headquarters, where it was parked in their yard from 1955 to 1985.
Oh my God.
Did not move. The late Don Moran, who owned Moran Ambulance, bought this in 1985 and did a kind of a partial restoration to get it running. Don passed away in 2018. The car was once again in his backyard, flat tires, hadn't run in years. So we bought the car, did a complete restoration from the frame all the way up, and changed the colors. It's a local car. It's been in California since 1947, and it remains as part of the collection right now from Vintage Emergency Vehicles, the original 1947 S&S Cadillac ambulance.
Fantastic. Well, welcome back, Lou. Tell me more about the Henny.
So the Henny was purchased brand new in 1942 by a small town fire department in Ohio. They kept the car until the 1950s, where they sold it to a small town ambulance service. And then in the 1960s, the famous Packard collector Stanley Zimmerman bought the car for his own personal collection. In 1969, Zimmerman had so many Packards that he opened up the Automobile Driving Museum in El Segundo, where the car has been there ever since, and the car accumulated just over 17,000 miles in all of those years.
Wow.
In 2021, they started to sell some cars from the museum because they needed some cash because of COVID. I got a call from the curator from the museum. Would I be interested in buying a car since I knew I was an ambulance collector? And deal was made, and I've owned the car for about a year and a half now, and she's part of the fleet of vintage emergency vehicles.
Fantastic, Lou. Let's move on to another car, but I love... Okay, well, tell me about this beautiful Buick.
So this is kind of a special car for me. It's a local car. Growing up in the Toledo Lake Burbank area, I was very familiar when this car was in service. It's a 1968 Trinity Buick ambulance. It was owned by Snyder Ambulance Service. And Snyder Ambulance was the provider of emergency ambulance service in Burbank. This car is original as well. It's been used in a lot of different shows and movies through the years. It's a local car. Trinity was a small manufacturer that built cars in 1967 and 1968. This is the only one that survives.
Oh my God.
It was part of the Snyder Ambulance collection until 1985, where I purchased the car, and like the rest of my collection, it's a major part of vintage emergency vehicles fleet.
Thank you for saving it. It's a glorious original car, original ambulance. So let's move on to the next one that I really liked. Wow, Lou, you've got so many cars here. Tell me about this one.
All right, so this is a 1977 Superior Cadillac Transport ambulance. It was purchased brand new by Professional Ambulance Service in Glendale, California. Professional was the contract paramedics for the city of Glendale, but they also had a non-emergency ambulance service. This was purchased as a VIP transport car. The owner of Professional was Rand Brooks, probably more well known as Charles Hamilton in the movie Gone with the Wind. He also played in Hopalong Cassidy in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of movie star friends. And when people would come and go from the hospital as movie star friends, he wanted the lap of luxury to transport them home, and this is what we used. When it came out of service in 1985, I purchased the car. Today it's part of the fleet from Vintage Emergency Vehicles.
Fantastic. And is that why the back panel is totally solid and not, okay, it's for privacy?
Correct.
Great. Okay, let's move on to one of your other ambulances. Wow, tell me more about this Chevrolet.
So this was a vehicle that I drove early in my paramedic career when I was with the San Marino Fire Department. It's a 1969 Chevy Suburban ambulance that was converted into an ambulance by the Stoner Corporation of Santa Fe Springs. The way you see the ambulance is the way I acquired it in 1984. Hasn't been altered at all. When we got a new modern ambulance during the 1980s, I bought the ambulance. This is actually the first ambulance I ever bought. It's one of the first paramedic units that worked in the county of Los Angeles in 1969. And I drive this daily. Like I said, it's got just about 50,000 original miles. Once again, another fine vehicle from the fleet of vintage emergency vehicles.
Fantastic, and I'll bet that every child anywhere near where you're driving is just like, oh my God!
There's a lot of adult children here today.
That is true. Thank you for pointing that out because it's so true. I'm one of them. So this is so fun. Thank you so much, Lou. I really appreciate you sharing your collection of really cool ambulances. And I want to just thank you for being on Live in the Hearse.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome. It was really fun.